The government favoring certain industries.
Think about all the money that was invested in the whole green energy technology.
$34.5 billion.
Billions of dollars to green energy, mostly wind power and solar power, also biofuels like algae, all because certain people in government decided those are better. Andrew Winston agrees. He says they are better. He just wrote a book that says because of extreme weather caused by climate change, companies that make a big pivot toward green energy will make money and do good. David Kreutzer of the Heritage Foundation says, no, the green energy industry is a parasite. And Andrew, aren't green energy companies that get government help really parasites?
Well, it's kind of an odd word for any industry that gets money from the government, because that would cover almost every industry we have. And if you're going to talk within
I'll include
energy,
any industry that gets money from the government. Fine.
Okay, well, let's just stay within energy. The amount of subsidies going to fossil fuels just absolutely dwarfs the renewable energy subsidies. It's, according to the International Monetary Fund, globally about $500 billion up to $2 trillion a year going to fossil fuels.
I just have to stop you because we have this chart that talks about energy subsidies for different fuels, and wind and solar per kilowatt hour produced dwarf the fossil fuels.
Well, you're talking about the beginning of certain industries and how much money. I want to take you back, a little bit to the 1960s. The government, in particular the military, spent a ton on semiconductors. They bought almost every semiconductor that existed, and they drove the cost down. That's part of the role of government.
David?
No. First of all, that $500 billion number is bogus. It includes the subsidies to petroleum that the oil producers such as Iran and Venezuela pay so that their citizens can buy gasoline for $0.25 a gallon. So we shouldn't pay subsidies for windmills in the U.S. because Iran subsidizes oil for their gasoline consumers. The other thing is...
We agree there should be no subsidies for anybody.
There should be no subsidies for anybody. Okay.
I think we can actually all agree on that. If we price energy the way it needs to and price all of the externalities, all the costs that energy can cause society, then absolutely.
The externalities, meaning because fossil fuels cause climate change.
Well, that's one, but actually if you want to take it much more specific and much more tactical, they cause health issues. The coal industry costs about $300 billion a year in the U.S. alone, just in health costs. So we don't cost
David,
that,
what
that's
about
a subsidy.
that? The fossil fuel companies, they're killing us.
No, they're not killing us. And the studies that are used to back up those numbers have been pretty much undercut by other studies that show they were exaggerated.
Coal is nasty stuff, probably hurts some
and we
people.
clean it up. But let's get back to the subsidy. Everybody gets subsidies. That's just a straw man that they always put out. When the windmill industry had a temporary lapse in the windmill tax credit, the industry shut down. They didn't build any of them.
This was recently.
This was recently. That doesn't happen in petroleum. Subsidies
were supposed to be for these new industries, solar and wind. They're 30 years old now.
No, they're over 100 years old. We've had solar panels 100 years ago.
But the subsidies were there 100 years ago?
No, subsidies weren't there 100 years ago.
Subsidies are 30 years.
The subsidies are decades old. But the industries are much older, and they haven't competed because they're just not as viable.
Well, that's just not true anymore. The cost of wind and solar has dropped 70 to 80% just in the last 4 or 5 years.
The wind is cheap after the subsidies. It's cheap if you don't include the fact that it's intermittent.
Levelized cost.
But let's just say you're absolutely 100% right. I'm as happy as I can be. Let's get rid of the subsidies. Let's get rid of the mandates. Let's get rid of the portfolio standards. All of that stuff, throw it out the window. Let them compete. We don't need Washington to get involved. Okay, then we're agreed. But we've seen in the past when you get rid of it, it shuts down. We look at Europe. The electricity rates in Germany and Italy and Spain are 2.5 to 3 times the rates we have here.
Parts of Europe did what you want and didn't work out so well.
And they're replacing nuclear, not with renewables, but with lignite coal plants. So I just don't buy that.
Let Andrew respond.
Okay.
What Germany did that was almost physically impossible was they were trying to move away from coal and move to renewables and move away from nuclear. That is almost kind of physically impossible to do, and that's where they've run into some trouble.
You're saying you don't want subsidies, and then you point to Germany where it's just heavily subsidized. That's the only reason they have all those renewables.
The taxpayers pay.
The taxpayers pay for it.
These companies.
The industry is getting ready to shut down in Germany. They're moving. They're leaving. They're saying we can't pay 3 times the price for electricity as our competitors in the U.S.
As I said before, subsidies don't don't just go to wind power and solar power companies. Government gives your money to all kinds of fringe businesses. One makes jet fuel from algae. The U.S. Navy actually spends much more to buy this fuel, reportedly $150 per gallon, more than 60 times what standard fuel cost. One environmentalist tried to convince Sean Hannity that that was a good idea.
The U.S. Navy is one of the forefront leaders on talking about climate change because they have the
Why
most
would
to
we
live.
pay
And
60
national
times the amount for jet fuel when we're laying off brave men and women that serve our country?
Because, you know, this is the price that we pay to actually move to progress.
Andrew, this is progress, throwing all this money to makers of algae fuel?
Well, actually, it is progress, but I don't know where those numbers are from. I've talked to the Navy, the Assistant Secretary of Energy. I don't know where that number comes from. They just signed a contract for, I think, next year for $4 a gallon for a blended fuel. That's probably more than they're spending now. But again, I go back to the fact that the military, they invest in new technologies. They always have. They're investing in getting to fuels that get us off of oil.
David?
This
Yeah,
is smart.
but
This is smart for them.
They could do algae for 100% of what they use, and it would be swamped by a single big platform in the Gulf of Mexico.
Last month, California's governor promised in 15 years, California will get much more electricity from green sources.
Increase from 1/3 to 50% our electricity derived from renewable sources.
Listen to the politicians applaud. And, Andrew, this is government force. You're for that?
Well, look, the government is always, look, what does the government do? It has always set standards, things like safety standards, fuel efficiency standards, how much energy you should get from renewables. I agree with the statement, the criticism always about that government shouldn't pick winners. Saying that we want a certain amount from a certain category of fuels is not the same as picking winners. That says industry can innovate and find a way to meet that standard.
If it's not picking winners, what is it? I mean, so
Yeah.
they're saying you have to get it from this type of energy. They're not saying you have to get it from, the cheapest one. You started off saying you didn't want any subsidies or mandates or whatever, and now you're just applauding the mandates that they've announced in California.